Will everyone please join me in Gassho as I read the words of our founder, Master Shinran Shun. Clearly we know, then, that the Nembutsu is not a self-power practice performed by foolish beings or sages. It is therefore called the practice of not directing virtue. Masters of the Mahayana and Hinayana and people burdened with karmic evil, whether heavy or light, should all in the same way take refuge in the great treasure ocean of the selected vow and attain Buddhahood through the Nembutsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandabs, namandabs, namandabs. Good morning, everyone. It is so wonderful to see all of you here today. Thank you very much for coming. And after services, or after everything at the temple and the activities are finished today, please try your best to stay safe, stay inside. It's getting kind of smoky outside, so we don't want to be outside breathing in that unhealthy air. And it reminds me again just how much weather can affect our daily lives. I used to think as a child that the weather part of the news was probably the most boring part of the thing. Like, why do I care about this? It's like, if it rains, it rains, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But now, again, right, we see with the weather that the smoke is being pushed towards in our direction, yet my relatives in Southern California are experiencing a different type of weather with the effects of Hurricane Hillary coming up the southwest of California. So let's all hope that they don't get rained on. Well, of course, California always needs rain, but let's hope they don't get rained on too much where they get flooded. Today's passage comes from the chapter on practice of Shinran Shonin's Kyogyo Shinsho. And it reminds us again that the Nembutsu, right, while we all put our hands together and say Namo Amida Butsu, is not something that comes solely from just ourselves, right? Like, it's of course very easy to think of the self or me, I, my, as I am doing this practice, right? This is me doing it. But in reality, the Nembutsu comes to us from Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion, working of countless kalpas, 10 kalpas, countless times of birth and death and going through the cycles of hard practice, all culminated into this one very simple practice for all of us to indulge in. And the wonderful thing is that you don't need to be a saint to recite Namo Amida Butsu. You don't need to be a man or a woman or a person who's non-gender binary. You know, the Nembutsu is for everybody. The Nembutsu is for all of us. And I think for me personally, of course, when I have wonderful moments of clarity or when I am particularly moved by something, whether it be the score of a symphony or the libretto of an opera or some other type of for me, it's shomyo. For me, it's the melodic chanting of Buddhism that really moves me. But whether it be any of those things, I place my hands together and say, Namo Amida Butsu. But for me as well, when I really feel an effect is when all of us place our hands together and say, Namo Amida Butsu, because it makes me realize that I am not the only one affected by the wisdom and compassion of this vow. All of us are embraced by Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. All of us are able to receive this benefit, free of charge, by the way. Yes, of course, it's important to donate to the temple and to other charitable organizations, but in reality, we don't need money to buy our way into the Pure Land, to buy our way into enlightenment. This is a practice that is freely given to us, right? This is a practice that comes, for our sake, actually, for our benefit, purely for our benefit. When we, go throughout our daily lives, it's very hard for us sometimes, especially these days, to see wonderful acts of charity. But when we do see acts of charity, we, of course, feel this great sense of admiration for the person. We feel a great sense of, of gratefulness that they are donating. And, but in reality, we also, I think, are sometimes limited in what we can do, right? When we make donations or when we give charitably, right, we shouldn't empty our bank accounts, right? We shouldn't give so much that we can't, we shouldn't give so much that we can't like live ourselves. That's thinking, that's the compassion without wisdom. We need both, right? That is what Amida Buddha gives us on a daily basis, both wisdom and compassion. Compassion alone without wisdom is dangerous, but wisdom without compassion is cold and heartless too. Of course, it would be remiss of me if I did not mention that we are all thinking of our sister temple in Lahaina, Maui, Hawaii, that was sadly completely destroyed by the fires. We are still thinking of them. I have been able to receive many updates from the ministers' organization. I highly encourage you all to donate, if you can, to the Maui Disaster Relief Fund if you are able to do so. I have a QR code actually in the front in the foyer where you can scan that as well. And Bishop Harada, actually, in our ministers' meeting, told us of a wonderful story of in one of the Jataka tales, or the tales before Shakyamuni Buddha became the Buddha. And the story goes that there was this forest, right, where all the animals can live in harmony, but then there was a fire that started to happen, a forest fire. So, of course, all of the animals in the forest started to run out of the forest, right? And the brave lion, was taking charge, right? He was rounding up all of the animals and saying, "We got to get out of here. We got to get out of here." And he was, taking all the animals and having them run out of the forest. And then the lion, as soon as he was able to see, like most of the animals, if not all of them, were able to get out, he saw something very interesting. He saw a tiny bird dive into the water and then get itself wet and fly up into the air, and then it flapped its wings and dropped little droplets of water on the fire, right? Little droplets of water on the fire. And the lion saw the bird continuously going back into the water, up and, trying to, extinguish the fire with its feathers and with its little droplets of water, right? And the lion realized that the bird, this tiny little bird, was trying its best to douse the fire or to put the fire out with its tiny little body and feathers. So the lion roars up at the bird and says, "Hey, bird, what are you doing? There is no way that a little person or a little bird like you is able to put out the fire with your little body." And the bird replied back, "I might be small, my feathers might be tiny, I may only be able to, put little sprinkles of water here and there, but it's all that I can do. It's all that I can do." And this is an important lesson because for a lot of us, right, we sometimes can think of things like when we have group things or when we have group projects or even voting, right, or donating. We may think to ourselves, "Oh, this $5 I donate to this fund, or it's not going to make a difference," right? That, first off, that's not true. That is not true at all. Every little bit we do makes a difference. But at the same time, sometimes it's all that we can do, right? It's all that we can do. And yet, at the same time, when we all place our hands together and say, "Namo Amida Butsu," you hear the echoing of the Sangha. You hear the many voices calling out in response of sincere gratitude and heartfelt compassion of how beautiful the teachings are. When all of us chant at the same time, right? Now, of course, I like to think of myself as having a good chanting voice. Maybe you don't agree, I don't know. But if I'm just chanting by myself, what am I really doing, right? What am I really doing? I'm just showing off. My chanting is meaningless without all of your chanting together with me. When we all sing together, right? So yes, in concert and in performances, you have the soloist sometimes who comes up and has a beautiful voice, and they can really wow and impress people. But what impresses me more is when we all sing together. Yes, the vast majority of us are probably not professional singers. That's okay. All of us are singing together in chorus with one another, which highlights again this Buddhist principle of the non-self, or not just me. Yes, it's true. Maybe you might only be able to donate $5, but if everyone donated $5 to the Maui Relief Fund, think of how much that would go for. Yes, maybe one vote, right, maybe one vote you may not think may make a difference, but if everyone votes, everyone can talk about, or can sort of express how they feel about a certain issue, and it can be seen. And the same is true with Namo Amida Butsu. All of us should say Namo Amida Butsu. We can say it at our homes, we can say it in the car, and of course, but for me, when it's the most beautiful is when we all come here to the temple and say together. This isn't to say that Nembutsu in the temple is stronger or is better when you're in the temple, or it only works when you're in the temple. But at the same time, it reminds us just how many of us are affected by this teaching and rely upon one another to continue this temple and to get through our daily lives as well. This is why it's very easy for us to sometimes say, I do this, or this is my work, I do this by myself, this is all a result of my hard work. But the Nembutsu strictly states that this is not a practice that is just coming from our own power. In fact, if anything, this is a practice that we are reflecting on that comes from not just the self, but from everybody. This is the ocean of people involved with chanting and saying Namo Amida Butsu. It is not a self-power practice that gets us to the Pure Land, right? While the Nembutsu is the key that causes birth in the Pure Land, it comes from a much bigger source, which is the wisdom and compassion of Amida Buddha. When we realize this, we realize further just how interconnected we all are, and just that we are not these, selfish little beings, but that we are part of a bigger picture. All of us here have a part to play in how this temple goes and how we exist in our daily lives. It sometimes becomes too big to fathom, too large to realize. But when we all sit and chant together and say Namo Amida Butsu, for that moment, we are able to really experience this sense of no self. So I would like to thank all of you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come to this service today. Thankfully, the weather cooled down just a little bit. We experienced some hot weather this past week. But I would like to once again encourage all of you to please think of our Nembutsu, fellow Nembutsu practitioners in Maui who are really deeply affected by the fires. Please think on them, send them your love and compassion, and if you can, please donate. In times of real hardship, it also just does my heart so good to see the amount of money, but not just that, but the fact that so many people felt a very strong need to give and to send messages of compassion and support. If this isn't a working of Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion happening in the here and now, I don't know what is. So I would like to thank you all once again for coming today. Thank you to Bishop Harada for sharing that wonderful story about the bird during our ministers' meeting. It really affected me. And I sincerely wish you all a safe week when, like I said, please try your best to stay cool and stay indoors if you can to avoid the somewhat unhealthy air that is outside right now. But in closing, would you all please join me in Gassho? Clearly, we know then that the Nembutsu is not a self-power practice performed by foolish beings or sages. It is therefore called the practice of not directing virtue on the part of beings. Masters of the Mahayana and Hinayana and people burdened with karmic evil, whether heavy or light, should all in the same way take refuge in the great treasure ocean of the selected vow and attain Buddhahood through the Nembutsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandats, namandats, namandats.